For starters, though, the man who knows a thing or two about food and health, Sarmado Sibley, explains what he means when he says food isn't just for eating.
The food that we eat has the ability to affect every experience that we have, depending on what that food is, good or bad.
Right.
But the great thing, I mean, there's quite a deep one because I could go really down the rabbit hole on this. Um,
Go on, go down the
yeah.
rabbit hole.
I mean, we all know that people would book a restaurant for dinner, for a treat, or for a celebration because they really love the food in that restaurant.
Yeah.
And nowadays we have chain restaurants. So they're kind of standardized foods produced in a plant and then distributed to many of these restaurants within that chain. But the true authentic restaurants that we would find, particularly when we're on the continent, when we're in Europe on holiday, is that chef or those owners of that restaurant, what they're able to tap into is the community and their local environment. What they do is practice an art of sourcing artisanal products from their local suppliers and growers and producers. Now, whether that is a peach from a particular vine that's grown in a particular region of France, let's say, or honey that's produced by bees in a particular habitat with the scent of that lavender or those wildflowers, they are bringing together people who are really committed to producing the best of food in the local environment. So they are almost like these owners or patrons or chefs of these restaurants or establishments. They're almost like patrons of the local food. And when in the past, when I've worked in restaurants, the connection you had with the growers, the farmers, the producers, and the land became so much deeper because they're passionate. They invite you onto their farm, or they invite you for supper, or you get to eat those foods and feel a lot better because you know not only are you going to feel better for it, but you've also contributed to the local economy.
Yeah, and I love that because it's nourishing on every level, isn't it?
Mm, totally, totally, 100%. The
Yeah.
amount of times I've met somebody that has such a vigor for their product, I don't have, I mean, the list would go on and on and on. And I think the point I'm trying to get to is to share that food is community. It's what brings people together, especially if we reflect on that time we've spent in Europe, let's say on holiday, because that's the perfect example, where you've got the time to have that long, leisurely lunch. And I'll use Italy as an example, but you would see the long tables and you would have all the generations coming to share food. Because what they do is they make time for it. That is not something that has happened in our culture for a very, very long time. Food has been treated as something that you have to consume quickly or not consciously because you've got so much else on. And most often it's been something that's kind of on the side next to the computer or whilst you're multitasking.
I
It
have
doesn't.
to I have to hold my hand up to that one today, Samantha.
Well, we've all done it. But the thing is, I'm going to go back to the restaurants as well. If it's that chef and they've sourced, Genovese basil and they know a grower down the road that's got a particular variety of tomato, when you put that energy into sourcing those foods, you want to create the best environment so that you can consume it, enjoy it, find it pleasurable, and be able to share that experience with other people. And what happens is conversations happen and memories come flooding back of a recipe that your mother taught you, or your grandmother, or maybe an experience in childhood. And it's in that place where real magic happens. People are doing or producing these foods, they're really doing it out of purpose-driven passion, and that a lot of the products aren't found easily in the supermarkets. They're out there in your local environment. They're down the country lanes and in the farmers markets.
So how do we get back to this food and community way of living?
It's a good one. It's a really good one. I mean, many years ago, Jen, I came across an organisation set up in Italy. I don't know if they're here in the UK, but the ethos we can learn from, and it's called Slow Food. And this organisation would find a particular farmer that was growing a variety of olive and was pressing the oil, or they would find a vinegar or a fruit, or just maybe varieties that would probably be extinct if they weren't protected by this organisation. So we have an opportunity now to be able to go online. We're so lucky. We can just Google or type into the search engine a food or an ingredient that we would like, and then tap in your locality and see if there's anybody. Okay, you might not have anybody growing bananas, or you might not have anybody growing cacao, but you can find a lot of products in your local environment just by Googling, whether it's at a farm or a farmer's market or a little independent grocery store. And when you do that, you can connect with the owner and have a conversation with them. You can look at the product label and find more information, do some research, have a look at a website, have a look around, see if there's anybody in your local environment that's creating supper clubs. Because it's amazing. It really is like a rabbit hole, because you may find somebody that's producing honey, but they're also doing a talk or a tour around the hives and the life of a bee. And what you're going to do is you're going to find a group of people that are interested in the same subject. And when you get those people together, like bees, the community of bees leaving the hive, you never know where that conversation's going to go, because you may all find that you love a particular dessert, let's say with honey, and somebody says, wow, I used to do supper clubs, or I used to do catering, or, I've heard.
Or my mother used to make this thing, which was just fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard of people being invited to allotments because somebody's got an amazing variety of Cabernet Nero growing, and then it all ends up, everybody's getting, turning the crates over and sitting on the crates and lighting a fire and making some food together.
Yes, and this time of year, obviously, there's a lot of fruit ripening. I'm thinking particularly of apples and Victoria plums, which are my favourite kind of plum. And I noticed in my area, in my community, a couple of people saying, if anybody wants any plums, they're by the garden gate. Because you can't consume all those, one family can't consume the number of Victoria plums that come off a Victoria plum tree. It's just impossible. You might want to freeze them, but even then. So give them to people around, and people will come and take them from you and have a chat. Have you noticed that this is something which happens more with, the current circumstances, let's just say? Or do you think that was happening anyway?
I think it's probably happening a lot more now in the current circumstances, because just as an example, I had quite a lot of lawn at the front of the house here, and around springtime, I decided to dig it all up and turn it into vegetable beds.
Well done.
And I did see so many people in the village that I'd never seen before, because they were out walking with their families and their dogs. And so many people actually stopped to comment on the fact I was growing food. And it was remarkable, because the feedback I had was really encouraging. But also, I hadn't met these people before. And we were having really good, great conversations. And it was all about the food. And it doesn't matter if you're not in possession of a garden or don't have access to a garden. You can grow in pots, or you can grow on the windowsill. But the relationship between you and food becomes so much better when you see the growing process happening. And here in Somerset, there's actually a road near one of the villages, where around this time in September, they all have the little tables outside the house, and they have a glut of produce. And you don't have to go to the shops. You can actually just go down this road and randomly pick things. And they're all honesty boxes. You know, you just put your coins in there for what you get. And that also protects, or it looks after the local environment. You know, it's encouraging.
Yes, and what about coming together to grow food communally? Is that something that you've had experience of?
Yes. Yeah, I was involved, or I am involved, in a project that's been running since the spring this year. It's in Wiltshire, called Griffin Growers. And what they've done is they've acquired some land, and they've decided to grow by sustainable agricultural methods a very healthy range of fruits and vegetables. And the idea behind that is so that those fruits and vegetables can then be turned into foods, which then the local community can come and purchase. But they can also come along and get involved and learn about the growing process and volunteer their time to learn how accessible it is to grow food. And again, that brings people together. And then at the end, you know, we haven't started it yet, but there are plans for there to be shared suppers and shared lunches afterwards as well, with what's come from the garden.
Which is fantastic. And there's also, I read a lot about community fridges that are popping up in lots of towns, where anybody with a glut of produce just puts them in the fridge, and, you know, people can come and help themselves. And I think some of them you don't even have to pay money. I think it's just, you know, a free-for-all. It's stuff that's there for anybody to take, which is fantastic, really.
Yeah, it really is, because it reminded me when you said that, when I was in America, they weren't food fridges, but they were actually down this street I was living in, and they had letterboxes, but big letterboxes, and they were full of books. So when people had finished reading books, they put them in these boxes, and people could just grab a book.
Yeah.
So we've got a very similar scheme happening here, just down the road, and they've got a fridge, and the same thing happens. There's so many growers.
Yeah.
There's so many producers around here, and they're putting the excess in and they're taking it, which I think is phenomenal, because the amount of waste that's created in the supermarkets and what actually goes, hopefully, at the end to the food banks, but I hear that a lot of it doesn't. It's a much better feeling to put your food into one of these fridges and know that it's going to be of value to somebody.
Absolutely. And I'm thinking, though, what about people who live in cities? Big city like London or Bristol or Birmingham or Edinburgh or Glasgow. I mean, you live in a semi-rural area, I live in a semi-rural area. We have access to all kinds of things that people living in the middle of a city don't.
Yeah.
How can they come together there? I know there are city farms. I know that there are, you know, growers' organisations in city centre, you know, in the middle of cities, city centres. But how does it work in a city?
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, I was involved with a project, and that project is based in East London, and they had a community growing project. So it was a bit like a community farm within the City of London, where people could go and volunteer and learn how to grow food. And then the food that came out of that garden was then provided or put into the kitchens that they also had. And then people could then go and learn how to prepare certain foods. And it was quite an interesting project, because the people that were coming to volunteer were from every age, every background, very diverse. And that was a volunteer scheme that was running. And I know there's many of them in London. Fabulous initiatives happening.
That is fantastic. Now, if somebody's listening to this and they think, well, I want to do something, but I'm not sure where to start, what would you suggest?
So the first thing probably would be to have a search and see if you've got any farmers markets that are happening, because even in the cities they happen. And you can talk to the farmers. You can talk to these people who've grown your food. Second to that, you could always have a look at the local council websites and have a look and see where the allotments are in your area, and take a walk up to an allotment, see where there's some activity, see if there's anybody working there, and then strike up a conversation and have a chat, because you never know where that's going to lead you. And the other thing is I'd have a search for local growing projects, and then of course put your postcode in, and see what's happening. Because I know last year there was one project which started with a guy saw some disused railway arches and knew that he could put them to use. So he set up a microgreen farm.
Yeah.
And they're filtering the water and they're growing all these incredible microgreens in disused railway tunnels.
Yeah, you can grow stuff anywhere, can't you? That's one of the beauties of nature. Nature will come through anywhere.
Yeah, it so does. So that's a really good opener or some tips there for how you can find out what food is available locally and grown locally, because it's those conversations. I mean, I know people that have struck up conversations and it turns out that they're multi-skilled and that they have a food project going on, or they're mushroom foragers as well. And maybe they go to the seaside and they do seaweed foraging and they supply to the restaurants. And again, a perfect example of community around food.
Absolutely. So just getting back to the effect it has on us individually though.
Mm-hmm.
And, I remember when I was a kid and we used to go to visit my grandfather and he was growing everything in his garden, potatoes, onions, tomatoes, you name it, strawberries, all these things. How do we get back to that connection to growing our own food and that connection of families and communities sitting around the table eating produce that they have grown? And what would that do to enhance our lives, do you think?
Wow, now that's a question. So that's there's lots of answers I could give to you on that one. I think starting off, when you go out and you next buy some food, let's say it's in the supermarket, and you've picked up your weekly shop or you've picked up a few items, turn the packet over, look at the ingredients that are on that packet. The very fact that you've actually stopped and read what is on the packet is massive to start with in terms of being aware of your food, where it's come from and how it's grown. Because most of the time when we're busy and we've got a lot to do, we unconsciously just throw the packets or the products into the trolley, or we do it online and we don't see what is in the food. Another thing, which I remembered a few days ago, I was living in Thailand for a while. And I was astounded by the fact that every time I met somebody, whatever their profession, whatever they were doing, whatever age, the first thing that they asked was, what have you eaten today? Or not what have you eaten today, have you eaten today? And if the answer was yes, the conversation would go somewhere else. But if it wasn't, you'd find yourself eating with this person. You'd be going out for lunch or dinner or eating some street food. And in that time when you were sharing food, then the conversations would start. And I've been on a train in Italy and I've heard Italians talking about who makes the best sauce, where they had the best sauce, where they had the basil from, what are you having for dinner tonight, what are you making for Easter, what are you doing? Food is such an integral part of their culture. And I think that has been lost. And if we can start talking about our food, what did you eat? Where did you eat it? Have you been to a restaurant?
Who grew it?
Who grew it? That's the fundamental, who grew it? But just starting that, because you'd be surprised the conversations that can start from those simple questions.
And then that leads to a support in the community, doesn't it? Because you're supporting the local growers and the local growers are supporting you. And it's this symbiotic relationship that is really quite precious.
Yeah, it's very precious. And to get a better relationship with our food, slowing down is a big part of it. And the ingredients on those packets, on those products, seeing what you're putting inside your body. If you really want the authentic product, if you want the stuff that's really good, then you'll start seeking it out and you'll start having those conversations.
Brilliant. Well, we could talk about this all day, but I think we'll draw it to a close right there. And just remind people where they can find out more about you, and if they want to get in touch with you, where do they go?
Awesome. Thanks, Jen. Well, the website is sarmadosibley.com. That's at sarmadosibley.com. And there's lots of information on there. We're going to be sharing recipes and there's loads of courses and info for you to kind of pick up and run with.
Fantastic. And if people want to get in touch with you about the community idea and want to talk to you about that more, they can email you through that website, can't they?
Yes, they can.
Fantastic. Sarmado, thank you once again. Fascinating talking to you about food as ever. And I hope you'll come back and talk to us some more about different aspects of food in the future. Thanks a lot.
Would love to. Thanks, Jen.